Now we will move on to the concluding panel discussion of the day on governance beyond the numbers, from rule book to the value-based compliance. Special thanks to Excel Industries for their valuable support as a digital sponsor for this panel discussion along with the ENY and DTTC. I would like to welcome our esteemed moderator and panelists on the dais. Mr. Bharat Vasani, partner Cyril Amarchand Mangaldas and chairperson of our Legal and Affairs IPR committee. Mr. Ashok Barat, founder MERX Business Advisor LLP. And Mr. Ranjit Shahani, former Vice Chairman and Managing Director, Novartis India Limited. Due to certain unavoidable circumstances, Mr. Uday Khanna has expressed his apologies for not joining us today for the panelist. I request Mr. Bharat Vasani to begin with the session.
So, very good afternoon to all of you. I will begin today's session on this resilient board with a very small story, but very interesting story which is relevant for the board. On 29 June 1997, an incident happened which I want to narrate. It was an incident with regard to, I don't know how many of you have heard, in UK there is a club called Royal Pigeons Racing Association. In 1997 they had completed 100 years. They used to organize pigeon race from France to London every year, and owners who win used to get a very attractive price. It's a very, very well-known association. So they were completing century, and on 29 June, 60,000 homing pigeons, and pigeons, as you know, are well known over the centuries for reaching the destination absolutely on time, on perfect, and that's why all kings and rulers used to use pigeons for messaging where we did not have this modern system of communication. So these pigeons were well trained to leave a particular field in France, southern France, and reach a particular place in London, and they will all land there. And the winner, the first pigeon comes, he wins the race. Now on that day, the pigeons were flying, you know, as per the scheduled time, 6:30 in the morning they left the France, southern France. Around 11 o'clock in the morning they were on that English channel to reach UK at that particular destination. And by around afternoon they would have landed at around 1 o'clock, they would have landed at the location. Surprisingly, on that day, none came. 60,000 homing pigeons. And it was a very big disaster. It was a century of that club. And I'm telling this because it's very relevant for our today's topic, resilient board. There was an absolute chaos. They didn't know where. And finally, late in the afternoon, about 20-30 pigeons arrived. But large chunk, vast majority of just did not reach the destination. They don't know where they were. One Professor Jonathan of American Geological University, he was restless. He said, how can this happen? So let me dig deep into what happened. And he found that the pigeons are used to two types of sound. Subsonic sound, so they can figure out where the ocean is, almost 300 kilometers away, 400 kilometers away, and sonic sounds. And on that day, what happened, when they're flying, the regular Paris-New York Concorde flight, which was delayed, so at 11 o'clock when they were crossing the English Channel, the supersonic Concorde passed over the pigeons, and through the terrific supersonic sound waves at 160 kilometers wide, and those pigeons were not used to that supersonic sound. They were used to sonic and subsonic sounds. And as a result, they just got withered away. The 20 pigeons who arrived finally at around 4 o'clock were the lazy ones who took off very late. And by the time the Concorde had already flown over. Now the story for the board is that, you may be successful in one particular business context or one particular situation, but a completely new situation comes, new context comes, a devastating change comes, or a disruptive technology comes. Are you going to win? And many of the Indian startups which are failing today because of overconfidence, are they prepared for the situations which they are not prepared for? The pigeons were not prepared to take supersonic sounds. And he found out, and this is well documented, so I'm not telling imaginary story, it's well documented, there are books on it. And used in Harvard Business School also, this story for resilient boards. Now coming to our topic today, what has happened in India? Now I'm coming down from 35,000 feet discussion to a very granular discussion on what's happening at the ground level. See, what has happened is that India has perhaps one of the most elaborate and most detailed-oriented regulatory architecture for corporate governance. We have very elaborate prescription of who would qualify to be an independent director, what should be the composition of audit committee. And you know that composition of audit committee changed every time there was a new scam discovered. So it's originally 1/3 independent directors. Then a scandal came, it became 50% independent directors. Now it has come 2/3 and I'm waiting for one more scam and it will become 3/4. So SEBI immediately amends that clause. NRC, the governance code, the duties of directors, you name everything and everything is legislated. We believe that the answer to every problem lies in legislating for a new change. And SEBI is so prolific. LODR, which started as a principle-based legislation regulation in 2015, is amended 36 times so far. And 37th amendment, Savitri knows, is coming any day, which is going to be most profound and devastating. Now, which is expected any moment, so maybe the gazette, it will be in the gazette. So, in this scenario, what happens is that the boards, the way the boards are handling the situation, I will go into some very interesting questions with the two learned panelists. Both of them have spent more than 4 decades in the corporate world and far more experience says. In the morning, I think Suhas mentioned that Suraj ko diya dikhane wali baat hui, so I'm not going to introduce him because they are both former presidents of this chamber. Now, in this context and background, where SEBI has gone a bit overboard in terms of regulating, and so is the Ministry of Corporate Affairs, every time there's a scandal, new change, and try to, have we in practice reached a situation where the boards are effective? And what is coming in the way, which are coming in the way of effectiveness of the board? And I think one aspect which I would request both the panelists to harp upon, and I'm going to ask a specific question. In my experience, and I've been serving on public companies, boards and others, the chairman's role is the most critical. Chairman of the board really decides what is the level of corporate governance in the country. Is he democratic? Is he autocratic? Is he allowing free discussions at the board meeting? Is he really allowing the people to ask right questions to the management? I worked under an extremely autocratic chairman who wouldn't allow any discussion and would only like to hear his voice, to a very, very democratic chairman who could really take the board to a next level of deliberations. So with this short background of a pigeon story, I would now ask a very first question to Ranjit, Shahani. In your experience, how effective are Indian boards today? Very candid, and I think this is a Chatham House rule. You please don't quote us outside. How effective are Indian boards? Because I have a view on it.
You have a view on everything, I know that. But when you were telling us a story about how SEBI has become so strident and articulate in all the rules that they change, I was reminded about a little one-liner I saw on the back of a truck just 2 days before, in some ways relevant, and it says, "100 mein 99 beiman, phir bhi mera Bharat mahan." And now, whatever SEBI does, there will be somebody somewhere finding a way around it, just as we saw in cybersecurity. I'm told that the cyber infiltrators are sitting in every company's IT system already. They're there. You don't even know about it. When they will strike, they're going to decide. So they're always 6 months ahead of you. But coming to your specific questions, there are boards and there are boards and there are boards. And you can always segment these in very different categories. The startup company boards, the well-established company boards, the MNC boards, the owner-driven boards. And I think each one of them actually have some distinct characteristics. But again, to answer a question, how effective are these boards? I don't have quantitative data on that, nor can I hazard to guess. But equally, I know that I'm on a couple of company boards. I'm the chairman of some company boards and all. And I can see distinctly different DNAs operating in these boards. It depends a lot on where the companies come from. It depends on the steer, what the chairman gives. It depends on how independent the independent directors are, and how well qualified, not, I wouldn't say qualified, but what are the experience the CEO and his team brings to the table, to the board. And the CEO, the chairman can be the steer. He's not the operative chairman. It's just a light touch, and they have to come back to its own level of competence, the company. And again, the CEO also, he has to create 1,000 spark plugs, but also be pointed in one direction. They cannot be going all over the place. So the effectiveness of the board depends a lot on the whole structure, the way it operates, how the chairman steers the board, and how the independent directors put the board and put their foot down on certain issues. And again, we will come to, I'm sure, the definition of what means an independent director. But we still have some way to go in India on how effective the boards can really and truly be in the ideal sense.
Ashok, I would like to modify slightly this question with specific details because you are a man of nitty-gritties. Is the board effectiveness affected by which are these factors I am narrating? Chairman's personality, whether democratic, autocratic. Second is the quality of information shared with the board. Third is the asymmetry of information between executive and non-executive directors. And fourth, of course, is the approach, relationship between the chairman and the board and the CEO. Which you think are the most important factors which is affecting the effectiveness of the board and how to address it?
Thank you, Bharat. So first, let me answer the first question that you asked, Ranjit, which is how effective the board is, and I tend to agree with him. I would neither issue a character certificate nor a charge sheet. In fact, it could be, my experience is that a board performs very effectively on one day. You have a very candid and a very detailed conversation. On another occasion, it can be completely haywire. So a lot of it depends on the chairman, the agenda of the meeting, the kind of pressure that you have. But one thing I have noticed, and this is not something that people here will like, that we are still a country which is used to prescriptive regulation. The kind of, a prescription's Damocles sword hanging on the head brings about a certain discipline in the conversation, which pure self-regulation does not. In fact, it's very sad, but that's the truth. I'm not saying that, we should be overly prescriptive, but some degree of prescription, some things that become mandatory for boards to consider, to report, to note, to approve, I think is very, very important to bring about that structure in the conversation. Otherwise, it tends to be a very haywire conversation, and everybody tends to go to a subject which is glamorous and in which everybody can have a view, and they don't want to get into the details. The reluctance of the board to get into the details is a major issue, which I think we will speak about it a little later.
I'm going to go into that.
Yeah, so we're going to speak about that a little later. But coming back to the chairman. So the chairman, I would divide chairman into three kinds. One is, and since I sit on various boards which have got different characteristics, one is the owner chairman who is not a full-time executive. The second one is a completely independent chairman who is a professional. And the third category, which is also a very important category, where you have an executive chairman or the chairman who is the chairman and the managing director. I think the experience in all the three are very different. My expectation is this as follows, that where you have an owner chairman, when he comes into the boardroom or she comes into the boardroom, she should or he should leave the ownership hat outside the door. This is where the problem starts. When you start confusing your ownership interests versus the fiduciary interest that you want to discharge, or you have to discharge, you're expected to discharge when you're sitting as a chairman of the board. The second category, where you have a completely independent chairman, I think they tend to forget the fact that here is someone, a promoter, who has put his name, his family wealth, his time, his fortune, his destiny into the company. And therefore, the board has to be respectful. It does not need to compromise itself, but it has to be respectful. And that chairman will have to play a role of being a bridge between the board and that promoter. Simply becoming an independent, behaving like an executive who has been a managing director before and says that I bring the same style to bringing into the board as a chairman doesn't work. There has to be an element of respect to the promoter, and this promoter is not just about an Indian or a family promoter. It is equally true of multinationals. The third category, which is the most difficult to handle, is where the chairman is also an executive of the company. any conversation becomes an affront and an inquisition into his or her executive decision. This, to my personal view, is the most difficult situation to handle, where you cannot have a candid conversation because the person becomes extremely defensive about, because everything is related to some executive decision that has either been taken or proposed. So this is the way I would like to answer this question.
So I just want to make a comment on that. I think, this whole business of rule book and rules around compliance, they can give you compliance, but they don't give you commitment. And that comes from the chairman, from the DNA of the organization. And the second thing is, I was interested in Ashok's point about the owner-driven companies. Now, we tend to say that the board should look after the minority shareholders' interests. It's not only minority shareholders, it's all the stakeholders' interests.
Exactly.
And the owner sometimes tends to look at his own interests, and it's only separate fit for minority shareholder interests. So we'll be very careful about these situations.
I'd just like to add, Bharat, my personal philosophy is what's good for the company cannot be bad for anybody. But the converse need not necessarily be true. And that is where the problem is.
Yes, I agree. Now, Dr. Sani, I just wanted one more issue which I want to address, and which is a perpetual dilemma which most of the board members face. And I've seen this happening, is the degree of involvement of the non-executive directors of the board in the operational matters of the company, and the maturity levels of different boards are different. I have come across situation, a person who has just retired as MD, you retired as MD of Novartis, and then joined the board as an independent director. Transitioning from a role of an executive director who takes every decision to being more a supervisor and broad guidance is an extremely difficult transition. And I've seen some very bright CEOs who join the corporate boards don't realize that now their role has changed and they are supposed to be taking a back seat and allow the management team to function. So many times I have seen CEOs, I worked in Tata Groups, complaining to me that a board is breathing down my neck and 75% of my time goes in managing my board rather than running my company. So situation is that there are boards and boards. For example, there are boards who like to get detailed into M&A transaction, everything they want to get involved, operational matters. I remember one board I was sitting, a CEO presented a proposal for, it was an insecticide company, which chip to be provided to the field officer. So Mahindra and Mahindra Tata Motors ka discussion mein आधा घंटा गया. So that, now board gets involved in operational matters. So what should be the Lakshman Rekha, which the board should draw, that it is not my job, allow the management team to function, let them breathe, let them function. You are supposed to provide a guidance and not run the company.
I think it's a very important point you raised, because for somebody who transfers immediately from his executive role to board position, an elegant transition is very important. And most people who want to be on boards should start preparing for it before they retire, not after they've retired. And some boards you have, and I'm on those boards as well, where some of these independent directors as well almost try and take an executive position. Then a lot depends on the chairman how to guide that discussion. Now, it is true that as independent directors, there's, as you already mentioned, asymmetry of information between the executive and independent directors. So we also, in some of the boards that I am, we also insist that individual presentations are made by management to the independent directors. We also allow the independent directors to have interaction with the senior management. This is not to get into the operation, but to understand, so that when it comes to strategy, direction, governance, they can give their independent thought and viewpoint rather than be in operational mode. So this requires some introspection, how not to be an executive director which is operational. It requires some training. It requires some guidance from the chairman, who's usually more of a larger number of experience than fresh independent directors. And I think there's a big opportunity which is opening up. Next year, there'll be a need for 2,000 independent directors in the listed companies. But if SEBI, of course, changes the rule, it may be much more than that. But I think here's an opportunity to create diversities of boards. Here's an opportunity to create people who can steer and help and guide the board rather than being operational directors.
Ashok, your views of this?
So, as a board member, you can actually have three different attitudes. And I'm going to use some light-hearted definitions for it. One is a helicopter view, the second one is a club view, and the third one is a battlefield view. Okay? So these are the three combination of mindsets that you can bring. Unfortunately, the truth will have to lie somewhere in between, because different circumstances, different contexts would require you to play different roles. It's like, playing, जैसे कहते हैं किरदार. Prem Chopra, I believe, was a very nice man in real life. But, in fact, in one film there was a dialogue, Prem hai naam mera Prem Chopra, just to say that, this is the ultimate of villainy that you can think of. So you have to play the three different roles, and each one of them has their own context and use. There are some positions, say for example, if you're an audit chair of a bank, you cannot have a helicopter view. You cannot. I mean, you don't deserve to sit in that chair if you have a helicopter view, because it's all about nitty-gritty details. It's about RBI circulars. It's about inspection reports. It's about checks and balances, controls. You can't just do that. But on the other hand, if you are discussing a strategy about brand, I would say that, some kind of a club view would be very useful, because, if you are bringing a social element of the conversation into it, it becomes very useful. So therefore, there is no right answer for this. I think what is more important for board members is that they have to contextualize the role that they play with where they are sitting. In fact, let me tell you, as a person, I behave very differently when I sit in the audit committee versus where I sit on the board. I'm very consciously cognizant of the fact that the irritable way in which I behave in the audit committee is not the way I should behave in the board. And that comes from training, it comes from personal attitude. This would be my answer.
Very good. Now I want to share something, ask a question based on one study which Tata's had done. I was at Tata's, and Mr. R. Gopalakrishnan, who was the HR director in corporate governance in charge, formerly with Levers, he and I had commissioned one study on independence of independent directors. So what we did was Tata Management Training Center at Pune with 3 expert researchers interviewed 100 independent directors of across India, some of the most eminent names, on a completely no-names basis. And the results were quite shocking. Most of them confessed that when there's a strong chairman sitting at the board, they don't feel comfortable asking inconvenient questions at the board meeting. If they are uncomfortable with one particular decision at their agenda, they either meet the chairman privately before the board meeting or after the board meeting is over and say that, can you reconsider this, perhaps this can be problematic. But at the board meeting, they don't have the courage to speak up. Second was that most of them said, and again I don't know, that most of them were retired professionals who were top-level executives. For them, this independent director's role is very important. It gives them an exit to go out of the home away from the nagging wife, and gives a few hours of... So they would like to say, if they ask very difficult questions, he said it's a cozy club, the message goes around that this guy is a difficult director, nobody will appoint you again. So they tend to get very, very defensive and not try to raise too many inconvenient questions, though they are intelligent enough to ask those questions, but they would try to be a little more defensive. As the one director very aptly put it, that even if you have to fire an arrow at on some issue, we dip it in a honey and fire it. So that is the question. Now with this background, where some of the most prominent name, I don't want to, because it was a completely anonymous study, the ability to ask inconvenient and difficult questions at the board meeting, and I've said on some of the international boards where they are very direct and blunt. So that cultural issue in India is also playing an important role, where we have an absolutely towering personality sitting as the chairman of the board. Your ability to ask very difficult questions on some of the issues gets affected. What is your view on this? This is a study documented.
So, I would, first of all, I'd like to correct one comment you made from nagging wives. It can be nagging husbands also. I mean...
Absolutely right. Irritable husband.
Husbands cannot nag, they can irritate.
Well, I have a wife who's on 7 boards, so I was going to reverse that. Anyway, yeah. So, but one very inconvenient question which I would be curious to know, and you may have or may not have asked in the study of yours, is at what remuneration level does the independent director become a dependent director, and therefore
That was the next question.
and therefore does not ask embarrassing questions of the board, because for a lot of retired people, very large number don't need that income, but for some of them, the income is very important, and therefore they become very subservient to the chairman and the operations of some of the difficult situations in the board. So I think that is very important. It's so personality-driven in many cases. You can have a really, really strong chairman who is literally an operating chairman, and it becomes difficult for independent directors to get a word edgeways. And one of the reasons, again, I come back to the asymmetry in information the independent directors have as well. And therefore, it's not easy to ground such a strong chairman, but it is personality driven on both ends, both the chairman's end and the independent director's end. I mean, I'm on a board where I have an independent director who is, I don't want to use the word vicious, but is like a Scottish terrier. Once he gets a bite in your leg, won't let you go till you have the situation sorted out or answered in a very correct way, notwithstanding a strong chairman. So it's so much personality driven, but I think it is importance required, because the whole idea of having a 50% independent director just disappears if you have IDs who are subservient to the board or who are looking at other reasons for not asking difficult questions or getting themselves involved in the direction the company should take.
Ashok.
It's very easy to, hold the chairman responsible for this. It's true. Sometimes their personality can be so overwhelming and overbearing. But let me flip the thing around to the other side as well. First and foremost, taking on a board role is taking on a responsibility, not a job. I think that mindset is very, very important. Hopefully, and I would like to believe most people in the room who are actually board members, nobody minds an extra money coming in, but this is not their source of living. It gives them a social label. It gives them an intellectual satisfaction. If you think that you're taking it on as a job, then I think you're making a fundamental mistake and you're causing stress to yourself, because you're driving accountability for which there is no need for you to be accountable. And in fact, just to give you an example, in one of the boards I was sitting, we were going to have another new board member, and the chairman of the NRC said that, we have interviewed 5 candidates. And I took great offense to that. I said, you invite people to the board. You don't interview candidates. You can say that I met 5 people. We could do a search. There's no problem. Do a search, do a research, find out people, meet them 5 times, get them to be met by 20 people. That's not a problem. But don't use the word interview and a candidate to define a board member. You are setting that person into a mindset which is actually going to be self-destructive. So this is a very, very strong view that I have. And I think it's very, very important for boards to recognize that. And these are small signals that you set the tone at the top. The second thing is that not everything that is decided by the board happens at the board meeting itself. If you take this on as a responsibility, you will find ways and mechanisms to have conversations which will result in an outcome that is good for the board and at the same time, good for the company and at the same time not ruffle any feathers. Whether you like it or not, owners are bound to be people who have egos, and you have to be respectful. I'm actually very respectful of promoters, not just Indian promoter, but even a foreign promoter. And in fact, Ritesh is sitting here. So we used to have in levers the concept of socializing a capex. So this word used was socializing a capex. Before every major capex, the general factory manager would, speak to the technical director. He will speak to the research director. Blah blah blah. Emissaries like us who are youngsters who would be sent out to the profit center accountant to explain this thing. You create a overall package of communication. Then what happens at the board is only a very focused and sharp discussion. If you think that every conversation has to be a tutu meme and at the board level, it is not going to work. And this is my experience and a very strong recommendation.
Okay.
Some countries even have the union membership as a board member.
Yes.
And that brings a different kind of power relationship and equation and questioning and set up in the board.
There's one more provocative topic where SEBI has dangerously come close to enacting it and held back because of strong resistance from the board and the senior management. That is this concept of lead independent director, which is there in all Western countries. What is found in our survey Tata Management Training Center, if there are 5 independent directors on a board of 10, they all feel कि सारा सब time मैं ही क्यों, why should I bail the cat? Every time there's a very inconvenient issue where promoter is doing a dirty related party transaction or doing something which is obnoxious, why should I be the bailing the cat? So there is no leader. And what is found is that if there's a lead independent director who is the senior most in the board and well respected by everybody, then if he raises, then everybody kind of latches on to him and then they have the courage to ask question. But every time a difficult situation comes, the director feels, why should I only be asking? So this was discussed and debated even in the Kotak committee, recommendations were made, but then at the same time there's a fear, CEO feels that, and it was also discussed that such lead independent director should be provided in the office of the company, he should have access to all the senior management team members whenever he wants to be. So CEOs felt that this is almost like creating a parallel power center within the company, and there was a very strong pushback from India Inc. SEBI is again thinking about it, several discussions have happened. What is your view as a lead concept of lead independent director which is there in the Western world? Will it work in India and is it, how good is it?
Sir, you first.
Okay. Well, first of all, it operates quite well globally. We've seen that. But in India, we don't have the concept in operation. In a very small and obtuse way, it is an operation to extend that we have at least 2 independent directors meeting outside of the regular board meetings where some of these matters are discussed. And the person who chairs that meeting gives that feedback to the chairman. So to the extent that some of these issues which you are talking about are raised, they're done twice a year, but in a very different way, but not on the spot in the board meeting. And what happens is, I think, depending on the personalities of the IDs and the chairman, etc., the independent director then is held holding the can more often than she or he should do. And depending on the other IDs as well, they pass on all the buck to him or her. And I am honestly not very sure how it will operate in India unless we start practicing it. I think it is an idea whose time has come, but I'm not sure how it will operate in India. Barat?
So I am, not in favor of this. And parallel power center is just one of the arguments. I'm actually more fundamentally opposed to it because of a different belief that I have. And my belief is that first and foremost, the board itself is a collegium and not a cohort. And therefore, if you take that definition as true, then the independent directors are not a trade union within the board. And therefore, to have someone as your leader of the pack, like a pack of wolves, I think is not required. In a collegium, everyone is expected to play a certain role because he or she brings a certain degree of specialization, characteristic, outlook, and that conversation has to happen. The moment you make someone a leader, then you're creating a very different hierarchy within the independent directors of having someone who is the first among the equals, which is not the intention. The intention is to have a collegium. In fact, the intention is to have a collegium at 2 levels, at the board level and at the independent director level, and that's why you have a regulatory requirement to have this off meeting every year. So I personally am opposed to this, whether it's in Indian context or an external context. But what could happen is, say for example, if there is a particular project which is very, very critical. For example, I'll just give you an example in one of my companies, which is a very large retail company. And in fact, it's unimaginable that it doesn't have an ERP system as yet, because maybe 2 decades ago, they went in for an ERP and it was a disaster. And they have now, therefore, decided to go in for an ERP. One of the directors, she comes from Microsoft. She said, I'll put up my hand. Let's create a very special committee of the board, which will oversee this particular implementation so that we don't have a disaster again on our hands. Create that. She has become the lead director for that particular project, which is going to run into some 20-25 crores of a spend. But the moment you start creating a trade union-like culture, then, I think you are destroying also the chemistry and the compatibility and coordination and the cooperation amongst independent directors. I think I'm fundamentally opposed to this idea. This is my view.
Working very well in the Western world though, yeah. Anyway, now I'll read the last question, thereafter we can take few questions from the audience. The very last question, which is bothering me, which is used again in the Western world. India Regulators can only focus on the cognitive part. These are the characteristics of a director. Independent director is not related to promoter, blah, blah. The behavioral part at the board meeting is not addressed, and it cannot be addressed. Just because you select a person who ticks all the boxes of section 149, it does not necessarily mean that he will be demonstrating his independence at the board meeting. Now, also, I've seen boards where 2 or 3 directors dominate the entire discussion and others are by and large very quiet. So in the West, the culture is started now what they call board coach or a cultural director, who is not a member of the board, a very senior retired person, eminent chairman, but he sits like a fly on the wall in the board meeting. He doesn't utter a word. He just observes the board behavior of various board members. And after the board meeting is over a period of time, he quietly gives this feedback to the chairman that you need to change the composition of the board. You have only 2 or 3 members who are chartered accountants dominate all the discussion. You are not discussing these aspects. There is a problem here, there is a problem there. This is literally, no, I know there are regulatory issues. He will be regarded as an insider, and Savitri will say his name will have to be entered in the structured digital database, fine. But he is like a fly on the wall. He just sits there, observes everybody, and finally tells that, I think there is a correction needed. Your board composition needs to change. Do you think it can work in India?
You know, this, to my mind, it brings about a very artificial construct in the way the matters are discussed in the board meeting. And because the directors, independent or otherwise, know how they're being literally evaluated on every element that they discuss, the whole discussion will be contoured in a different way in India. My personal view is it'll not work very well, because it's like a report card and a principal holding a stick behind your back quietly, and you say fly on the wall, but you say walls have ears and ears have toes. That's the way the message goes, So somewhere this information kind of comes out about the independent director, and I would personally feel this won't work. I'm not sure, is SEBI looking at something like this?
Not heard of it.
Not heard of it yet. No. Okay. That's my view. That's my view.
But SEBI comes out with 12 circulars. SEBI comes out with 12 circulars every day. So if it comes, you won't be surprised. Ashok?
Yeah, I totally agree with Ranjit. If board, if you need a person like this, then what's the chairman there for? What is the NRC head there for? You are covering up for their lack of delivery. By this kind of, creating this construct. As it is, let me also tell you that the quality and the candor of conversations in the board, particularly after the recordings have started due to COVID, has taken a severe beating. In fact, most of the boards now, or many of the boards, we actually have a pre-board call, which is not a recorded call, okay? And because people are very careful about what they speak. I know of one case, at least in a bank, where the minutes of the meeting were very sketchy, and the inspector was smart enough. He said, "Look, you people have a recording. You're supposed to keep for 6 months. आप मुझे recording दे दो. मैं जब देखता हूँ उसमें किसने क्या बोला." And completely within their right to ask for that information. In fact, tomorrow even MCA can do it. Even ROC can do it. You have to keep it for 6 months. SEBI can do it. So therefore, in any case, the candor of the conversation has gone down, and people are much more careful and circumspect. And on top of that, if you introduce another set of flies, then you are going to create a lot of problems.
I agree. I just, and the last question left before we go to the audience is the compensation part. Now, at what level of compensation the independence of the independent director gets compromised? There are different things. Now, Companies Act, as you know, has been amended that you can pay a fixed amount to an independent director. I have seen, I'm not telling hypothetically, seen situations where CEOs are so smart, they give, on a pretext of setting up some meeting with customers, international free travel, first-class airfare ticket to exotic destinations, that is going to meet the customers, everything goes to the company account. I have seen non-independent directors being provided a car at home to take care of it, many other freebies on different festival occasions. Now, and I have seen a very big scam happening in the Tata Group because of this kind of freebies being provided by the CEO to the board members, where they were supposed to speak and they chose to keep quiet. And a major scandal had happened, which was a public report in 2001 for almost 2 years. That was Tata Finance fraud, where the CEO had the practice of pleasing the independent directors with various freebies. What is your, Ashok, what is your view on this? Because I believe this is really big.
Always goes first.
Okay, Ranjit, you.
No. At one end you have boards which are very parsimonious, and the range of the fees which independent directors draw could be from 10 lakhs to 1.5 crore. Now that's a huge range, and if you are on the board of 4 or 5 companies, it's a whole lot of income. And then the question really arises: are you going to be truly independent? Because if you lose that income, you're down by 4.5 or 5 crores a year. So I honestly cannot answer this question truly. It all depends on the individual value system and DNA of the individual director, on regardless of the income, whether you're independent or not. And I've seen some very, very, very senior people who the annual income from board is, let's say, just 10 lakhs, but they remain on that board because they want to make a difference, they want to make a change in the company, and they're not running to the other company which is paying some huge obnoxious amount of money. So I'm very strongly of the view that it should not make a difference, but I do know in some of the cases it does make a difference.
Ashok.
I tend to agree with you. It's, in fact, the example that you gave is not a question of compensation. That is wrongdoing. There's a big difference between wrongdoing and compensation. I can only say one thing, that there was a recommendation that at the option of the independent director, you can choose to have employee or stock options. I personally think that that would be a wrong thing to do. Because, on the one hand, you have the protection of minimum compensation even when the profits are insufficient. And on top of that, then you want to seek another premium on top through employee stock options. I think it's a very unfair way. As I said, if you take this on as a responsibility, I think this kind of a thing is not acceptable. But as Ranjit said, how much is enough is very difficult to say, because in some boards you end up spending a disproportionate amount of time, and most of the banks, of course, don't give commission, for example. It's just meeting after meeting after meeting after meeting, and there are alternate meetings because of these calls, Nilesh, where you don't want to say what you have to say. So this is what it is.
But I want to give an example of a board meeting which Chatham rules follow, so I can't take the name of company anyway. But when COVID happened and when all these laborers from Mumbai, etc., started moving outside with nothing in hand, the chairman suggested that the annual commission of the board members should be given to that cause. And I could not believe it that half of the directors wanted to debate on it. Should we give all of it? Should we give half of it? What? I said, what is happening here? And of course, finally, our majority said all 100% commission be given for 2 years in a row. But I was shocked to hear some of the well-known people who you would meet were debating this. So there are people and people.
So we have now 5-7 minutes left. So I would welcome. Yeah, please ask.
My simple question is, ethics and governance are not defined. Since they are not defined, we keep on getting new set of rules.
Yeah.
Sometimes becoming little impractical. And on top of it, the title to the debate today was rule-based to value-based. Now, rule-based itself is becoming impractical to handle. So I don't know how value-based compliances can be actually managed, No,
I totally agree with you. I think it's very difficult to, just see the transformation that took place when Ind AS was introduced. I still remember, because you had to lay down policies and for all the accounting judgments that you make. Endless debates. I mean, we was, most of the companies was struggling to even lay down policies. The other day there was a very interesting debate. They were changing the useful life of assets. Now, is it an accounting policy change or is it a judgment? 3 meetings, gone in that.
Ashok, 90% of the audit committee members have not even read the Ind AS accounting standards.
So I totally agree with you. That's why I've said, you have to be little spiritually inclined when you join the board and say that it's a responsibility that I've undertaken.
Please, yes, please.
Yeah, I think there was a lot of
Can you identify yourself, please?
My name is Kashika Bhalla. I'm a director with EY, Ernst & Young.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of conversation today about the diversity of boards, and of course I understand that really means the breadth of experience that all of the board members really bring and bring a different perspective on the topics that are being discussed. But on that note, I mean, how often in your experience have you seen, women board members beyond the mandatory one person that is required as per regulation on audit committees or on board members? And do you see any difference in companies that, put across an approach where it's really only on the experience and not on the mandatory compliance?
You raised a very important point. It's not only diversity, but it's also inclusion. And the difference is, you might be invited to a party, that's diversity, but have you been asked for a dance, that's inclusion. So, you have to be very careful on how these boards operate as well. Ideally, it should be a 50-50%. If you take gender diversity and other diversity included. Today, I think the boards, a large number of boards are not really focused on true diversity to start with. I think it's only when cybersecurity or digital came, they started looking at experience and diversity in that aspect. But gender diversity, I don't know, Bharat, I don't know either, but only 20% of the companies are having one woman board director.
Yes, and not only that, the overall board composition process, it's a cozy club, friends and these things. So merit and, the comfort, is he a dependable independent director?
Yeah, but we have quite some way to go. We have quite some way to go on both the questions that you asked. Yeah. And I'm quite honestly dissatisfied at the situation where we are in today.
I just take on that not from a diversity of gender diversity point of view, but this is one of my very fantastic experiences of a very Tony NBFC company, where you had to go for every board meeting dressed in a tie and everything like that. Very, very. So the chairman, he decided suddenly that he will get a startup entrepreneur as a board member. And the reason he got that startup member, he said that, we are only asking the same. I've been the chairman now for 5 years. I have not heard a new question ever since then. And this gentleman, he runs a very, very successful digital map company of India, and probably the largest. And he came into the board meeting dressed in a t-shirt and jeans. And believe you me, after about 2 meetings, the kind of questions that he started asking on the distribution, for example, or marketing was incredible. Completely out of the box. So it is not just gender diversity, it is the diversity of the mindset which is important.
Diversity of thought.
Diversity of thought. And once you do that, then automatically you will become agnostic to whether you are getting a women director or the moment you start, as he rightly said, the moment it becomes compliance driven, then there is no commitment.
To use Mr. J.R.D. Tata's expression, you should be entitled to disagree without being disagreeable. So ask. So
can I?
Yes, please, Nagesh.
Sir, I think Ranjit and Ashok both, the performance evaluation of a director, this is the annual
ritual
exercise that happens. How seriously it's taken? Can you just help us with some sort of examples and what kind of things happens? Especially independent directors, how are they evaluated and what kind of feedback mechanism is given?
Please go.
So, first of all, again, there is an extreme of situation in this. In some, it's a purely a tick box situation. The other is taken very seriously. And a lot of depends on the chairman on how well the feedback and discussion she or he does with the independent directors. And I'm on some companies where it's done very elegantly, very seriously, and to great impact, because you can see the difference it makes in the next round of meetings. And in some, it's not even literally discussed, and that's a sad state of affairs. And these are listed companies as well, by the way. Obviously, I can't take their names, but we still have some way to go in making this ideally what it should be. We still have some way to go.
Nagesh, it's maturity level. In many promoter-driven companies, it's company secretary's responsibility to fill up the marks.
You can deny that.
Certainly deny.
Yeah. Yes.
Just as you mentioned what Mr. J.R.D. said, Mr. Bharat's comment on the ESOPs. Assuming a director has a two-term stint of 10 years, and the way today some of the industries are progressing, and assuming ESOP is part of the ethos of that particular company, right from top and the middle and the lower management, the way ESOPs, I think a lot of companies are doing that. I think on the principal point, what's wrong of, the ESOPs being granted to them, which is not part of the law right now?
Yeah.
I don't know if it's being considered or not.
No.
There's not.
as a mindset, they don't want to.
Anyway, so I think
Nilesh bhai, just the way I would answer this question is, you can't have your cake as well as eat it. So, why do you take your ESOPs? Because you are taking a future bet on the upsides. Are independent directors willing to say, A, I would not want the protection of compensation in case of inadequate profits, and I'm also willing to take a clawback condition? So if it comes, let's assume for a moment it comes, I think it should come with a rider as well. Because it just can't be. Otherwise, you're creating a problem. You're creating a problem. It may not apply to all the good people, but there will be people who will get tempted by this. And then it will give all the entire institution of independent directors a bad name. So let it come with a clawback. Or
clawback is fine, because internationally, ESOPs is a very good way of regulating.
Exactly. But I'm only worried about that if we do one without doing the other, we are only, then creating a problem for ourselves.
So we end with what Mr. Sahni started with, in Mera Bharat Man, so Mr. Nanyanve Beiman. So anyway, so I think it's like sharp 1:30, and there's one question at the fag end, last question, because then people are hungry.
Yeah.
Yes.
See, on one hand, we have the company who are appointing, who want to implement their strategy. For that, they are appointing consultants basically to find out the gray areas, to find out how to circumvent the law and implement the strategy. On the other hand, government is understanding the loopholes and they are overreacting to stop the loopholes. And sometimes these amendments are a retrospective effect and they make our lives difficult. So in such a situation, what is the solution? Is digitizing the compliance more would be a solution?
I don't think that by digitizing compliance you are going to solve the problem. The problem is much more vexed. I think we can have separate discussions over the lunch on what the issues are. I don't think by digitizing compliance you are going to solve the problem. There are niyat. Islam there is a very important principle called niyat. If niyat galat hai na, CEO, CFO are handing laws and everybody's mixed. No amount of digitization, no amount of checks and balances is going to help this. The fraud will still happen. If the niyat is right, that's a very important principle of Islam, and that's where it ends. So I think with this I would like to end the discussion because we are already we have eminent people hungry and I can't keep them hungry. And so I would request Aniya to propose a vote of thanks on behalf of them. Thank you to two of my panelists who did a wonderful job.
I would like to thank our speakers for the thought-provoking deliberation and panel discussion. I request Mr. Ritesh Tiwari to present a memento to the speakers.
This will not compromise our independence.
To Mr. Ranjit Shahani. To Mr. Ashok Barat. To Mr. Bharat Vasani.
Shall we give two?
I request all the panelists and moderator for the group photograph.
Thank you.
Now I request Mr. Manoj Sonawala, Principal Consultant, Manayog GRC Advisors, to sum up this conclave.
Today's conclave was on the resilience, building a resilience board. So let us first understand the definition, what do you mean by resilience, a person is resilient or not. So resilience is the process and outcome of successfully adapting to difficult or challenging life experiences, especially through mental, emotional and behavioral flexibility and adjustment to external and internal demands. See, this is the entire summing up of the today's conclave, because last panel spoke about the not rule-based but the value-based things, where emotions, your behavior of the chairman, your characteristics of chairman, they have discussed about it. Let us start with the Dr. Maselkar. He made us understand the word adapt very delightfully, and I'll not get into the details further. But what he said was regarding to that company has to be resilient and not individual board member. So collective board members can have a resilient board. He spoke about the not digitization, but it's a digital transformation of the entire activities of the board. Then third thing, what he insisted on the response time, that is the speed with which the geo or whatever examples he gave about the speed. So when you respond, you have to respond in a speedy manner, otherwise that response is of no use. Right? Now let's move to the future of the Atmanirbhar board. And our speakers, we talk about the Kurukshetra story, and we all know sitting on board is nothing less than a war of a Kurukshetra. We all agree, those who are on the board. Do you agree? Or still hungry? Please speak out, boss. At least not in board here, at least you can speak. We can really learn a lot from our Puranas and mythological these things, values. Now goes to cyber security. Now it's a like of a smasan vairagya. See, when we listen to this kind of a conversation at the level of these people, we'll feel, yeah, we are at the risk at every stage, even if a technology or a communication. The moment we go out of this, we forget about all the risk. Most of us, we don't talk about risk thereafter. So it's a smasan vairagya. When we are in a crematorium or a funeral, we feel, yaar, jindagi kuch nahi hai, sab kuch chhod dena chahiye. The moment we go out, where is my BMW? That is how we behave. So same way in the cyber security risk field also, we behave in the same. Unfortunately, we behave in that manner, but fortunately we have best of the people like Dr. Sarvade, Ms. Gupta, who can provide us the solutions. They try to work on that, but we can go in detail with them. I'm not promoting anybody. So it's a disclaimer from my side. Then we had a see what they spoke about the voice fabrication and to impersonation. So this is very fearful. But as a panel, they gave us a solution also that invest in the best security system considering the long-term plans, what Sir Tiwari has said. Right? So we don't have to consider the short-term plan or a short vision. We have to have a longer vision to consider the cyber security risk. Why he said so, you do know? Because the kind of investment which we have to make and the benefits which we have to reap is always long-term. Cyber security cannot be a short-term or a one-time investment. It's an ongoing process. Then our last, they said about the different types of chairmen, their personalities, and the drawing of a Lakshman Rekha, especially in the transition roles from executive to advisory roles. And then Mr. Barat spoke about the interviewing the chairman or the board of directors. I really appreciate what he said is correct, that when you talk about interviewing a board of director, it's very diminishing for the person whom you are adopting as an independent director. So their accountability, it's a wrong notion of accountability, what Sir Bharat has said. Then fine. The load on the independent directors is creating, lead independent director is creating a power center, separate power center. Though it is not a kind of a in vogue in India, but somebody has to take that role, don't you think? See, in every team somebody is a lead. See, when we take a separate meeting for independent directors, somebody has to be a chairman. So that lead role, if not defined or not so categorized, indirectly we are having that kind of a role. Somebody in the board also, other than the management, is taking up that lead independent role. So sooner or later that will come naturally. Then board evaluation through cultural directors. Bharat has talked about the fly on the wall. See, we have a board evaluation, there is a system, there are processes, and there are technologies available. Somebody spoke about the board evaluation, I think Nagesh sir spoke about the board evaluation. And there are simple, but comprehensive board evaluation process is available, and there is no require of such kind of a cultural director. That is what my feeling is. But going forward, it may be attracting SDD and whatnot. So let us not go further in that and restrict our discussion to that. With this, I thank you all for remaining patient till the lunch time is over.
Thank you, sir. I request Mr. Ritesh Tiwari to propose a vote of thanks for today's conclave.
I promise I won't take more than a minute. But my day was made today, sir, by comment that you made today. That you met somebody at a Bombay Chambers event that gave a connection to you, and that connection gave a solution to you. I think this is what Bombay Chambers starts for. And thank you so much for making the example for us today. On that note, some fabulous conversation today, some candid conversation, some thought-provoking conversation, and some provoking conversations. Really enjoyed the day sitting there and also participating. Let me start by thanking first Dr. Argunath Machilkar. What an outstanding presentation he did to all of us in the morning, and that really kick-started the day so well for us. So super thank. All the distinguished speakers on the forum today. I think we had fabulous 3 panels, including powerful moderators who moderated the session so well. And so super thanks to the moderators and to the panel members. And then always pleased, and we are delighted to have leadership of Unilever as a president to chair all the conversations that we end up doing. My thanks to the past presidents for being with us today, and to members of the Bombay Chamber Board for being present today and helping and supporting us to get the conclave done so well. Would also like to thank Ernst & Young, not only contributing to us on the stage today, but also giving support and sponsorship to the event today, to DTDC and to Excel Industries for sponsoring one of the panel discussions for us. Without sponsors, event doesn't happen, so thank you so much. And last but not least, it takes humongous amount of effort to get an organization of an event done. There are colleagues, all of us in the room. I'm also hoping to see there are a lot of colleagues on the call attending the session on Zoom today, and hence a special thanks to the Governance Council, Governance Committee at Bombay Chambers, Prasad Chandran, Ms. Savitri Parekh, Subhas, amazing apart from being a moderator, being a strong force in the course and today. And Sandeep, who's today enjoying a well-deserved break, but a lot of effort Sandeep Khosla has made our DG for the event to get organized. And to all fabulous audience in the room today, thank you so much, and God bless you all. We have a lunch in store for us. Apologies, colleagues who are on the Zoom call, you won't have the lunch with us, but for everybody else in the room, let's have a lunch together now. Thank you so much.